I don't think we're trying to like shill them. I don't think we're trying to be like, you know, oh, Apple's better than Android or Android's better than iOS. We're not trying to do that.
I actually read this one, and I would really recommend everyone reads it. I especially liked their take on iOS as a whole. They explicitly state iOS is better than Android for a bare minimum. Like, the worst app on iOS will always be better than the worst app on Android. I think that's almost a direct quote. That's almost a direct quote. Like, it's almost like objective at this point. Like, being on iOS is going to give you better third-party privacy and security than being on Android in almost every capacity.
If you want us to stop shilling Apple and Google, as you so call it, then you need to do your part to help make these things grow.
What is your reasoning for recommending iPhone over Android if we have no reason to suspect that Apple collects any less data and is probably collecting the same amount of data? Why would you recommend an iPhone instead?
Well, first, I don't know if it was the same guy who actually did this research paper, but it was someone else who did research that shows Apple actually does collect less data than Google, first off, and the opt-outs tend to be a little bit more effective on iOS. But also, we're trusting Apple here, which tends to be slightly more privacy-friendly than Google. Doesn't mean Apple's privacy-friendly, doesn't mean iPhones are perfect. That's not the takeaway here. But there's also other perks of being on the iPhone ecosystem. This story, for example, you could have a Samsung device where Samsung's tracking you, Verizon's tracking you, and even Facebook, because of the pre-installed apps that come with these phones, many of which track you, like this app does. And that's not really much of a concern on an iPhone. Like, you have these apps that might track you with Apple, but that's kind of about it. So it's generally just a cleaner experience, and it's more likely to be privacy friendly for the average user. If you're here this long and you've heard my thoughts on this, it's pretty clear. Like, I really do push the people in my real life towards iPhones if they're deciding between things. I just say iPhone or Pixel, but personally I kind of want them more on iPhones than the Pixels. So like, that's kind of why it's easier to just be like, if we recommend people to an iPhone, we know exactly what they're all gonna get. If you buy an Android device, it could be an Android device from Craigslist that's 3 years out of date from security updates. It could be something that comes pre-installed with Facebook that you can't get rid of. It could be something that has pretty much permanent Google Play services on it with no easy way to, like, we just don't know. The Android world is so complicated and convoluted, and a lot of times it's easier to just say, get an iPhone.
Those were the notes I had, because I already know there's going to be people who are going to point at this and they're just going to be like, oh, why do you guys always promote iOS when clearly they're so evil? And again, Google is evil too. They all suck. If you want better options, go be the change you want to see in the world.
It really is night and day. Like, Apple is obviously the winner by a huge mile. Not only the amount they collect, but what they collect. It's just leaps and bounds ahead of Spotify.
We try to honestly ignore most comments, because like a lot of the, not like the good ones, but like a lot of the comments were like, okay, yeah, sure, like we'll respond to like actual criticism, but a lot of things were just like, what? And one of those things is like, why are you promoting this? And it's like, we're not promoting anything, we're covering the news. This is a news show, so the news involves us covering things we don't like talking about. 90% of the things I cover I don't like on these stories. Doesn't mean I'm promoting it. We're gonna start with our first question from Mr. Camel999, who is our regular, and they are asking questions all the time. How would you guys recommend going about music streaming from a privacy perspective? Sure, I could self-host a solution, but adding songs to it every time I learn of a song sounds really annoying. I could use something like Spotify and alias as much info as I can, but I don't feel that's enough. Thoughts? Question mark. And one of my favorite solutions is Apple Music right now, because Apple does have a much better privacy policy than Spotify does. And also there are like actual third-party clients that are compatible with Apple Music. For example, Cider, which is an open source client for your desktop. So you can actually use an entirely open source music streaming software on Mac OS. And Apple Music also has web apps as well if you just want to use the web app. But I actually really don't mind Apple's privacy policy for Apple Music specifically. At least I think it's better than most things you'll find out there. I'm still gonna always recommend an Apple iDevice over like any Android device to most people in my life. It's just generally gonna be better for privacy and security for them, from what I've done and what I've researched. I'm not including custom ROMs in that, I'm just saying between those two. But that's a personal thought. Doesn't mean I'm promoting anything. Like, I'm still gonna cover the story the same way Nate would have covered that, because like this is clearly an issue with Apple devices.